My grandfather's will was a bomb, and every member of my family was standing on it when it went off. I was 26 years old. The reading was supposed to be simple, a formality, a distribution of assets among 5 grandchildren, the conclusion of a life well-lived. Grandpa Silas had been a quiet man, a retired postal worker who'd invested wisely in land during the 1970s, who'd lived in the same house for 50 years, who'd gardened tomatoes and fed stray cats and never said a harsh word to anyone. At least, that's what we thought. That's what we told each other at the funeral, where we cried politely and hugged briefly and calculated silently how much the land was worth now that the city had grown around it. Prime commercial real estate. 40 acres. Valuation estimates ranged from 12 to 20 million, depending on zoning variances and developer interest. The lawyer was named Harold Vance, a man who'd worked with Grandpa for 30 years and who looked at our assembled family with the expression of a man watching children play with a loaded gun. He sat at the head of the conference table. We sat around it, the 5 grandchildren, plus our parents, plus the spouses who'd married in and thought they had claims, plus the lawyer's associate who was there to witness and record because Harold had insisted on it. Silas's will is unconventional, Harold said, adjusting his glasses. He was very specific about the reading. He wanted everyone present. He wanted simultaneous disclosure. Harold paused, looking at each of us in turn. He wanted you to hear it together. My mother, Diana, squeezed my hand. She was Grandpa's eldest daughter, the responsible one, the nurse who'd checked his blood pressure every Sunday for a decade. She thought she knew what was coming, a fair split. Maybe a slight preference for the grandchildren who'd visited most often, maybe a trust for the great-grandchildren. My father, Robert, sat beside her, checking his phone. He was already planning the renovation of their house, the early retirement, the boat he'd always wanted. He'd been calculating Grandpa's death since the diagnosis, converting grief into spreadsheets. Across the table sat my uncle, Victor, and my mother's younger brother, the black sheep, the man who'd borrowed money from Grandpa 12 times and repaid it never. His wife, Candace, wore sunglasses indoors and clutched a designer bag that probably cost more than their mortgage payment. Their son, my cousin Derek, was 29, unemployed, and currently live-streaming the reading to his followers with a caption about finally getting what's mine. Next to Derek sat my aunt, Patricia, Victor's twin, the golden child, the one who'd moved to California and made real money in tech, and who flew in for holidays with gifts that were always slightly too expensive, slightly too performative. Her husband, Alan, was a venture capitalist who'd already called 3 developers about the land. Their daughter, my cousin Simone, was 31, a lawyer, and had spent the last month reviewing estate law, which meant finding ways to challenge the will if it didn't favor her. And then there was me. Juniper, the youngest grandchild, the one who'd lived with Grandpa for the last 2 years of his life, who'd quit my job to care for him, who'd changed his diapers and read him books and held his hand while he died. The one everyone assumed was the favorite, the one everyone resented, the one everyone watched. The 5th grandchild, my cousin Marcus, wasn't there. He died 3 years ago, overdose, though Patricia called it an accidental reaction to prescribed medication, and Victor called it the kid was always weak. Marcus's share was the wild card, the complication, the unknown that made everyone nervous. Harold cleared his throat. He opened the envelope. He began to read. To my children, Diana and Victor and Patricia, I leave nothing. You have taken enough. The silence was absolute, then it shattered. What? Victor was on his feet, his face purple, his hands shaking. What the hell does that mean? I'm his son. I'm his. Sit down, Victor, Harold said, not unkindly. There's more. Victor sat, but he didn't stop vibrating, a bomb with a frayed fuse. To my grandchildren, Harold continued, reading Grandpa's words, I leave the land, all 40 acres, but not equally, not simply. Silas was specific. He wanted, Harold paused again, looking at me with something like pity. He wanted you to earn it. The terms were these: the land was placed in a trust. The trust would be controlled by the grandchild who could hold it for 5 years without selling, without developing, without diminishing its character. At the end of 5 years, that grandchild would own it outright. The others would receive nothing, but there was a catch. A dozen catches. Grandpa had built a maze, a gauntlet, a war game disguised as estate planning. Any grandchild could challenge the trustees' right to hold the land. Challenges would be decided by majority vote of the other grandchildren. But Marcus was dead, so his vote, his share of the decision, would be determined by a sealed letter he'd written to Grandpa before he died. A letter no one had known existed. Simone's lawyer brain was already firing. This is unenforceable. It's perfectly enforceable, Harold said. Silas spent 2 years with estate specialists ensuring every clause would hold. Harold's voice dropped. He wanted you to understand what the land meant. What family meant. What he'd seen. Patricia's voice was sharp, Californiapolist, the voice of a woman who'd spent decades ensuring no one saw beneath her surface. What did he see, Harold? What could a postal worker possibly have seen? That he saw everything, I said. Everyone turned to me. I'd spoken without planning, without thinking, the words coming from somewhere deep and old and certain. What do you mean, Juniper? My mother's voice was careful, the voice she used when she thought I was having one of my episodes, the sensitivity she'd always treated as illness, the intuition she'd always tried to medicate. I lived with him, I said. For 2 years, he talked, he remembered. He saw things that happened in this family that everyone else forgot or pretended to forget or paid to make go away. I reached into my bag. I'd come prepared, not with weapons, not with lawyers, but with truth. The weapon my family feared most, the one they'd spent generations avoiding, the one that had made them declare war on each other rather than face it. I have Marcus's letter, I said. The explosion was immediate. Simone was on her feet, demanding to see it, threatening legal action. Victor was shouting about forgery, about manipulation, about the obvious bias of the granddaughter who'd wormed her way into Grandpa's house. Patricia was on her phone, calling her California lawyers, her voice rising with each word. Derek had stopped live streaming and was recording just me, his eyes wide with the recognition that this was better content than he'd imagined. Only my mother was silent. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly old, suddenly knowing, suddenly seeing the daughter she'd dismissed as fragile and emotional and not quite right. Juniper, she said softly. What did he see? I opened the letter. Marcus's handwriting shaky. The handwriting of an addict in recovery. The handwriting of a young man who'd written this 3 weeks before he died, who'd mailed it to Grandpa with instructions to open only after his death. Dear Grandpa, I read aloud. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Probably by my own hand, though I hope it was an accident. I hope I went out thinking I'd get better, not knowing I wouldn't. That's the kind of hope you always gave me, even when everyone else gave up. I'm writing because I know what they're going to do when you die. I've seen them calculate. I've heard them talk. Diana measuring your blood pressure while she measures your assets. Victor borrowing money he'll never repay while he counts your land. Patricia flying in with gifts that cost less than the tax deduction she claims. Derek recording everything for content. Simone finding the legal loopholes. And Mom and Dad and Alan and Candace and Robert, all of them standing behind their children, whispering strategies, planning the war. They don't know I heard. I was high, I was invisible, I was the family embarrassment who no one noticed in corners, but I noticed them. I noticed everything. Juniper's the only one who doesn't calculate. She quit her job for you. She changed your diapers. She read to you while the rest of us were too busy, too important, too entitled. She thinks she's weak because she feels too much. She's not. She's the only one of us who ever learned what you tried to teach. That land isn't property, it's responsibility. That family isn't inheritance, it's choice. So here's my vote, Grandpa. My share of whatever decision needs making. Give it to Juniper. Not because she's the favorite, because she's the only one who won't sell, who won't develop, who won't turn 40 acres of memory into $12 million of condos and parking lots. And tell her I saw her. In the corners, in the shadows, in the places where no one else looked. Tell her that seeing is not weakness, that witnessing is not fragility, that the one who watches, who remembers, who refuses to look away, that's the one who inherits. Love, Marcus. I folded the letter. The room was silent again, but different now. The silence of a battlefield after the first volley, when everyone realizes the war will be bloodier than planned. Simone broke it. That letter is inadmissible. Marcus was what? I asked. Hi, unreliable, an embarrassment. Yes, he was all those things. And he was also the only one of us who saw you, Simone. Who saw you forging Grandpa's signature on that power of attorney last Christmas. Who saw you practicing his handwriting in your hotel room. Simone went pale. That's a lie, is it? I reached into my bag again. I pulled out a file, photographs, timestamps, the evidence Marcus had gathered that I'd found in his apartment after he died, that I'd held for 3 years waiting for this moment. Marcus was invisible. You forgot him the way you forget furniture. But he had a phone, Simone, he had a camera. He had nothing else to do in the corners where you left him but watch. I distributed copies. Not to everyone, just to Harold, just to the record, just to the legal system that would eventually review this. But everyone saw, everyone knew. The photos of Simone practicing signatures, the emails to developers, the draft trust document she'd prepared, replacing Grandpa's name with hers. That's not, Simone's voice cracked. That's not what, and you, Victor. I turned to my uncle, who'd gone from purple to gray, who looked like a man watching his future dissolve. You didn't just borrow money, you stole his checks. $18,000 over 3 years, signed while he was sleeping, while he was confused, while you told him you'd handle the bills. I have the bank records. I have the signatures that don't match. I have the text messages to Candace about the old man's loose grip. Candace's sunglasses couldn't hide her fear. She gripped her bag like a shield. Patricia, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You didn't fly in for holidays. You flew in to photograph his documents, to record his conversations, to build a case for mental incompetency that you'd use to challenge the will. Your gifts were bugs, Patricia. The watch, the clock, the smart home devices you installed for his safety. Marcus found them. I have them. I have your login credentials, your cloud storage, your recordings of a dying man that you plan to use in court. Patricia's phone slipped from her hand. It hit the table with a crack that sounded like a bone breaking. Derek. I looked at my cousin, who was still recording, whose live stream had gone from dozens to thousands of viewers as word spread that something was happening at the Vance Law Office. You've been recording everything for 2 years. Not just for content. For blackmail. The videos of Simone forging signatures. The audio of Victor stealing checks. The footage of Patricia installing bugs. You've been selling access to Marcus, piece by piece, using his addiction to keep him dependent, keeping him close so he'd keep gathering dirt. You didn't help him. You harvested him. Derek's phone dropped. The live stream ended. His face was the face of a young man who just realized his audience had seen him exposed. And you, I turned to my parents. To Diana, who'd measured blood pressure and calculated inheritance. To Robert, who'd planned renovations and boats. You weren't the worst. You didn't steal, didn't forge, didn't bug. You just waited, you watched. You knew you had to know what Victor was doing, what Simone was planning, what Patricia was building. But you didn't stop them. You didn't protect Grandpa, you protected your share, your percentage, your plausible deniability. My mother was crying now. Silent tears. The tears of a woman who'd spent her life being strong, being responsible, being the good daughter, and who'd just learned that goodness without courage was just another form of complicity. Juniper, she whispered, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said. Not cruelly, just truly. That's different, that's worse, because you could have stopped it. Any of you could have stopped it. But stopping it would have meant seeing it. And seeing it would have meant being responsible. And being responsible would have meant, I stopped. I looked around the table at my family, at the war they'd declared on each other before they'd even known they were fighting, at the alliances that had already formed and dissolved in the last 10 minutes. Victor and Candace whispering urgently, planning their defense. Patricia on her phone, calling lawyers, calling Alan, calling anyone who could make this disappear. Simone staring at the evidence, calculating whether she could still win, whether the legal system moved fast enough to seize the land before the truth caught up. Derek refreshing his phone, watching his follower count rise and fall, trying to decide whether to post an apology or a counter-accusation. And my parents, holding each other, suddenly old, suddenly poor, suddenly realizing that their careful neutrality had left them with nothing. I have one more thing, I said. I reached into my bag a final time. I pulled out a video camera, old, consumer grade, the kind Grandpa had bought in 2015 to record his tomatoes growing. I'd found it in his closet, the SD card still inside, the battery still charged. He recorded everything too, I said. Not for blackmail, not for evidence, for memory. Because he was a postal worker who'd invested in land and grown tomatoes and fed stray cats, and he understood something that none of us understood until now. I plugged the camera into the conference room's display. I pressed play. Grandpa's face appeared. Older than I'd known him, younger than he'd died, maybe 80, still gardening, still feeding cats, still believing in the family that was already calculating his death. Testing, he said to the camera. Then he smiled, the smile I knew, the one that crinkled his eyes and showed the gap where he'd lost a tooth to a baseball in 1962. To whoever finds this, he said, I know what they're doing. I've always known. I'm not stupid, I'm quiet. There's a difference. Stupid doesn't see, quiet sees and chooses when to speak. Diana measures my blood pressure and my assets. Victor borrows what he can't repay. Patricia brings gifts that listen. Simone practices my signature. Derek records everything for reasons he doesn't understand yet. And Juniper stays. She reads to me, she changes me. She cries when I cry and laughs when I laugh and never once asks about the land. She thinks she's weak. She thinks feeling too much is a flaw. I tried to tell her feeling is the only strength that lasts. The land doesn't care who owns it. The tomatoes don't care who waters them. But the cats know. They come to the hand that feeds without calculating the return. So here's what I did. I made them fight. I made the wool a bomb and I made them stand on it together, because the only way they'll ever see each other clearly is in the explosion. And I made Juniper the detonator because she's the only one who won't use it to hurt them. She'll use it to show them. 5 years, Juniper. Hold the land for 5 years, don't sell, don't develop, don't let them make you cruel. Let them come to you. Let them ask. Let them learn what Marcus learned, that watching is not weakness, that witnessing is not fragility, that the one who sees clearly is the one who inherits not just land but the chance to change what family means. I love you all. Even the ones who are waiting for me to die. Even the ones who have already spent my money in their heads. I love you because you're family, and family is not who deserves love but who needs it most. Goodbye, plant tomatoes, feed cats. Remember that land is just dirt until someone chooses to care for it. The video ended. The screen went blue. The room was silent, truly silent, the silence of a war where everyone has just realized there are no winners, only survivors. Harold cleared his throat. The trust, he said. It names Juniper as initial trustee, with Marcus's letter as supporting documentation. The 5-year term begins today. Unless, he looked around the table, unless there are challenges, no one spoke. What was there to challenge? I'd exposed them all. Not to destroy them, that would have been easy, would have made me one of them. I'd exposed them to show them, to make them see what Grandpa had seen, to force them into the corners where Marcus had lived, where I'd lived, where the only thing to do was watch and remember and choose whether to look away. I accept, I said, not the land, the responsibility, the 5 years. The chance to show you what Grandpa tried to teach. I stood. I walked to the door. I stopped, my hand on the frame, and I looked back at my family, at the war they'd declared, at the peace I was offering, at the choice they had to make. The land is at 42 Oak Ridge Road, I said. There's a garden that needs tending. Cats that need feeding. And 40 acres that don't care who owns them but respond to who cares for them. I'll be there tomorrow at dawn. If any of you want to learn what he meant, be there. If not, I shrugged. The trust pays out in 5 years regardless. To me, to sell, to develop, to turn into condos and parking lots, your choice, it always was. I left. I didn't look back. I heard them begin to talk, to argue, to plan, to war, but quieter now, uncertain. The sound of an army that had just discovered its weapons were made of smoke. That was 3 years ago. The first year, no one came. I lived in Grandpa's house alone, tending tomatoes, feeding cats, watching the seasons change on 40 acres that the city wanted and I refused to give. I worked remotely, data entry, transcription, the kind of work that pays little but leaves time for gardening. I survived. The second year my mother came. Alone. Without Robert, who'd left when the money didn't come, when the boat stayed imaginary, when he realized that Diana's careful neutrality had left them with nothing but each other, and the silence of a marriage built on waiting. She didn't apologize, not directly. She just showed up one morning with a trowel and a bag of seeds, and she started weeding the north bed where Grandpa had grown peppers, and we worked in silence until the sun was high, and then she said, he told me once, that he knew about Victor, about the checks. He said he let it happen because he loved Victor more than he loved money, and he wanted to see if Victor would ever love him back enough to stop. I didn't answer. I just handed her the watering can. She came back, every Sunday. Sometimes we talked about Grandpa, about Marcus, about the family we'd been and the family we might become. Sometimes we didn't. She learned to grow peppers. I learned to forgive her, not forget, not excuse, but forgive the fear that had made her quiet, the responsibility that had made her complicit, the love that had made her weak. The third year Victor came. Not to the house, to the property line, where he stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the tomatoes and the cats and the woman he'd underestimated since she was born. I didn't love him back, he said. Not looking at me. Looking at the land, your grandpa, I didn't love him back enough to stop. I thought if I took enough, he'd finally say no. Finally see me. Finally treat me like Simone, like Patricia, like someone worth fighting with instead of just, he stopped. His voice cracked. Instead of just giving to, letting take, he never said no, not once, and I hated him for it. I hated him for making it so easy to be terrible. I walked to him. I handed him a tomato, ripe, warm from sun, the kind Grandpa had grown. He took it. He held it like something precious, something he'd forgotten how to hold. He knew, I said. He told Mom. He let you take because he loved you, and he made me trustee because he loved you enough to make you stop. Victor ate the tomato. Juice ran down his chin. He didn't wipe it. He just stood there, crying silently, a 60-year-old man learning to be seen for the first time. Patricia came next. Not to apologize, she was too proud, too Californiapolist, too invested in the narrative of her own success. She came to negotiate. I'll buy the development rights, she said. 5 million. You keep the land. I build around it. Everyone wins. No, I said. 10 million. No. Juniper, her voice sharpened, the old Patricia, the one who'd installed bugs and practiced signatures. You can't hold this forever. The taxes alone, I pay the taxes, I said. I work, I save. I grow food and feed cats and remember that land is just dirt until someone chooses to care for it. She stared at me. For a long moment, the Patricia who'd built empires and destroyed competitors, and never once lost a negotiation, faced the granddaughter who changed diapers and read books and learned the only lesson that mattered. You really don't care about the money, she said. Not a question. I care about what the money would cost, I said. 40 acres of memory. A house my great-great-grandfather built. The place where Marcus wrote his letter and Grandpa recorded his video, and I learned that watching is not weakness. Patricia left, but she came back. Not with offers, with tools. With seeds from her California garden, heirloom varieties she'd collected over decades, the one thing she'd built that no one could take. She didn't apologize, she just planted. And sometimes, when we worked side by side in the garden, she talked about the daughter she'd been, the one who'd left for California because it was easier to build empires than to be seen, the one who'd installed bugs because it was easier to record than to listen. Simone never came. Not physically. She filed challenges to the trust, to Marcus's letter, to my fitness as trustee. All failed. The evidence I'd gathered, the video Grandpa had recorded, the legal structure he'd built with Harold's help, it held. She spent 2 years and $200,000 on a war she couldn't win, and when the last appeal was denied, she sent an email, "You win. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. Winning wasn't the point. She'd learn that, or she wouldn't. The land would outlast her either way. Derek came last, or rather, I found him. He'd been living in his car, parked at the edge of the property, live-streaming the sunrise over Grandpa's tomatoes to a following that had grown from thousands to hundreds of thousands. Not for blackmail anymore. For something else, the only thing he'd ever been good at, the only thing that had made him feel real. I don't know how to be anything else, he said when I brought him coffee one morning. I grew up watching, recording, making content out of other people's lives because no one ever wanted to see mine. So show them yours, I said. He did. Not perfectly, Derek was damaged in ways that wouldn't heal quickly, the product of parents who'd used him as a weapon and a witness and never as a son. But he started showing up, helping with the harvest, feeding the cats, recording not for blackmail but for memory, the tomatoes growing, the seasons changing, the family that was slowly, painfully learning to be something else. Robert never came. He found another boat, another woman, another life built on waiting for inheritances that never arrived. I don't know where he is, I don't care. And Simone sent a letter last month. Not an apology. A question, what does he mean? That land is just dirt until someone chooses to care for it. I wrote back, come and see, she hasn't yet, but the invitation is open, the land is patient. The tomatoes keep growing. The cats keep coming. I'm Juniper. I'm 29 years old. I'm a granddaughter who held her family's war in her hands and chose not to fight it, who exposed her family's crimes and chose not to prosecute them, who learned that the opposite of cruelty is not kindness. It is presence. It is showing up every day until the broken thing learns to grow again. If your family ever declared war on itself over something that should have brought you together, or if you're still standing in the ruins, wondering whether to fight or plant tomatoes, drop a tomato below. I read every single comment. And if this story made you want to witness instead of win, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. What are you finally ready to grow? Backhand index pointing down.